This episode of the Brutally Speaking podcast is brought to you by On Point Pomade. Keep your beard and hair looking on point with their line of pomades and beard oils over at onpointpomade.com. Use our code BSP15 at checkout and get 15% off your total purchase order. So thanks again to On Point Pomade for sponsoring our show. This episode is also sponsored by the Bean Bastard Coffee. Head over to thebeanbastard.com and pick up any one of their delicious hand-roasted coffees. Coffee lovers will also enjoy their hand-cut and handmade espresso candles and soaps as well. If you're in the Buffalo, New York area, head to their store located at 448 Elmwood Avenue. And thanks again to the Bean Bastard for supporting this show. The Speaking Podcast is proudly sponsored by Rockabilia.com. With over 500,000 officially licensed items in their online store, you're guaranteed to find something you need. Use our code BRUTALLY and get 10% off your total purchase order. Now on to the show.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard. And you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give
up. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Brutally Speaking Podcast. I am your host, John, and this episode's guest is John LaMacchia of Candiria. He's about to put out a solo record, and it comes out May 20th via Aqualam Records. And I've had the pleasure of listening to this record, and it's really intriguing. You know, with a band like Candiria and some of the other projects that John has, done over his career, he has such a breadth of work that's out. So to say that, I would assume he's only going to be doing something that sounds like this, it's not as easy to do that. It's not as easy to pigeonhole him into something, given, like I said, the wealth of influences that band has been able to pull through and a lot of the things that he has done. I think he showcases that he's a very dynamic person with a lot of interests and a lot of far-reaching, ideas and influences and all those kind of things. And this record it taps into something a little bit different. And what was really interesting about this conversation was kind of getting more into, I would say, sort of like the headspace and the cerebralness of the music and kind of how things that he's gone through have kind of informed how the record sounds. And, without giving too much away, because it's funny through the connections that I allowed myself to kind of talk about some things that I don't want to say that they're embarrassing, but it's one of those where, and I guess I'll give sort of a spoiler away to the upcoming conversation, but, I talk about getting my cards read for the first time, and it's one of those where I was a little hesitant to bring it up, and I have been, because typically you assume that people are going to look at you and judge you like, oh, you did that. And it's funny because I'm starting to just not care about what people think of what I'm doing in my own life, first and foremost. But it's been very interesting that as I kind of open up more about my life experiences, especially on this podcast, that very oddly, it almost seems to be rewarded and almost kind of serendipitous that I'm telling someone this for the first time that I've never met, because of the connections that we subsequently end up making because we have a mutual shared experience or something that happened as an aside to, me sharing something or the guest sharing something. And that happened a lot in this episode with John. So much so that it was kind of freaky to just kind of be like, yo, this is very interesting and very much a telling tale of, I've made the comment, and I think I made it at the end of this episode, even during our chat, which was, sometimes I was supposed to have gotten someone on the show years ago, and it just, for whatever reason, never panned out. And then I finally have a conversation with somebody, And I think it's infinitely better because I'm not trying to do what I used to, which is kind of steer a conversation somewhere or be very rigid in my approach. But I'm a lot more fluid into letting a conversation happen and just kind of seeing where it goes. And I think in that, the shows are infinitely more interesting as a listener. And I know they are, at least to me. And usually when I talk to the person for a little bit afterward or whatever, I get that same sentiment. So it's one of those where this was a really interesting chat, and I really was looking forward to talking with John. And without further ado, let's just get into it. So here's my conversation with John. I'll talk to you all on the other side of it. It's usually like my go-to. I hit record too, by the way, when this just starts going. Sure. More of a conversation than anything. But I was going to say, it's so funny. Like, I have come to find that a lot of people kind of fuck with Dilla. Like, they're like, I dig it. Like, it's just kind of lo-fi. It's chill. It's ambient. Like, it kind of doesn't seem to matter who you are. Typically, when I have people come on, they're like, I dig it. It's a vibe for sure.
Yeah, I was vibing with it.
It's funny because, like, I feel like you... because I know you're a bit older than I am, and I'm almost 40, but being a product of, New York and stuff like that, like a show that I used to do co-host on called Discography Discussion, we did an episode on Candiria.
Okay.
At the time, a lot of people were like, I can't wait to hear John talk about this because, like, he's into hip hop and stuff like that, more so than the other two hosts. And so it was kind of funny because they'd be like, is this really hip hop? And I'm like, oh, this is really fucking hip hop. Like, I go, and they do it at a level to where you're almost like, I would love to see a full album of this. But I was like, I think the thing that's so interesting about collectively musicians that I find from New York is you just feel like the vibe, the melting pot of your environment. And it comes across like, the jazzy stuff, the like kind of eclectic hardcore stuff, like just everything that is inevitably what Candiria was comes through because it seems so authentically the melting pot of like New York and its environment.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, just so you know, that is absolutely not true. I'm definitely not the hip hop guy in the band.
Right. I know that, but I'm just saying like as a whole.
Yeah, no, totally. I do have my influences, and like you said, being from New York City, it's hard to be from this city and not be sort of influenced by the music that's around you. You hear music constantly on the subway, cars passing by, you just walk into a restaurant, you go anywhere you go, you were in a park, anywhere you are, you're surrounded by all kinds of music. And it's like I said, it's I grew up on soul, R&B, disco, my family was big into music. So, and you can't help but that getting into your blood and into your mind and into your heart and soul as a musician or an artist. And I still think those influences affect me, when I write. As brutal as the music I may write, or as dark and like heavy as I might write, still those things are there, and I talk to my friend Julie Christmas a lot about this. We talk about growing up and hearing like freestyle as an example we constantly bring up, because it's kind of funny, like, we find some of the lyrical content and some of the, the song and the songs and the style kind of funny, but in a way, we know all the lyrics. We know the songs when they come on. We know the melodies. This shit is like, it's in your head. And you're right, man. It is. Candiria would not be the band that it was without if we didn't come up where we came up.
Well, I think that's as I've gotten older, it's something that I've noticed so much is, you were just kind of speaking to, I'll say, kind of the DNA of music, like that you are able to kind of becomes a part of you, a kind of a connectedness. That's not a word. I'm kind of trying to meld words. But I mean, even it's funny because like even in listening to this record, your solo self-titled record, the last track, Why Are You the Way You Are? Like to me, it's funny, like listening to that, I couldn't help but think a couple of times, listening to the song, because I usually smoke before I go to bed to help me go to bed.
Uh-huh.
And so I kind of threw on the record because sometimes I like to just kind of see what that's like. The other day, it's been nice here in Michigan, so we had like 60-degree weather. So I turned down, cranked down the windows, just kind of, played this, kind of gave it that car experience, which I think is kind of lost on some people. But I've kind of taken the record in a few different ways, and I come back to the way that the record closed with "Why Are You the Way You Are," and I kind of feel like that song in particular kind of came at a very interesting point where it's like, I think a few years ago I'd been like, man, this song's like too droney, I'm just not into it. But like now I have like my therapy brain that I've kind of gone through with therapy and kind of doing some stuff. I had my cards read for the first time ever about a week ago, and there's just like kind of this almost self-discovery, like of the questions of why. And to me, like I hear a song like that and I'm like, this is something that someone who has lived a life would write, because I don't think you could write that as a young person.
Right. Well, I appreciate that very much. And it's funny that you mentioned getting your cards read, because, I think it's obvious to me that that's a reading, an actual reading that Candice Freshco, who actually co-wrote the song Angels Delight on the record and sang the song and wrote the melody and the words. She did the reading. The idea of putting this song on the album, I actually don't even consider it a song. I consider it more of a mantra.
I was going to say it feels like a chant, like a mantra. Yeah.
And I actually wanted to point out, I really love the idea of incorporating mantras or declarations and not just considering things songs and putting those on albums. I started playing with that idea. And this was a question that came into my mind. Should I put this song on the record? Is it relevant enough? Will it make sense with the rest of the material thematically? And once Candice, I asked her, I was like, would you be interested in doing a spoken word? Because I actually really do love the sound of Candice's voice. Her speaking voice she has this really great like tonality, this quality to her voice that I just really love. And she said, yeah, well, why don't I do a reading? And I was like, oh my God, this is fucking perfect. And she's like, yeah, dude, why are you the way you are? Wouldn't that make sense? And I was like, I love it. And we did. She did a reading and we recorded it, and I just took it and I literally ran the whole thing through. I edited a few times for the song to have this like sort of space and this quality to it, but pretty much it's the reading straight through. And yeah, man, I'm glad that you mentioned that track, because I felt that was the type of track that only certain people would sort of connect with it. But I hope everyone does. I hope everyone gets it.
It's so funny because like I'm starting to find, I don't want to, I guess I will call it permission, the permission to talk about some more of the experiences that I go through and how I kind of connect with things or things that I do. And I think this is actually the first time I've talked about having my cards read. Because like I said, it just happened about a week or so ago. And it's funny because the friend of mine's wife read my cards because she's getting into that aspect of I guess her practice. And it was one of those where I remember talking to my friend and he was like, I could set you up with my wife and so on and so forth. And I was like, yeah, I think that would be cool. I'm comfortable with her. I know her. I was like, so yeah, I think we should do that. And then he was like, you seem hesitant though. And I go, yeah, I don't know. Like, what do you do with the information? And then he was like, well, you went to therapy, right? And I go, yeah. And he goes, and how did you find that? I go, oh, it like gave me tools that like you don't realize you're getting them at the time. But like there are times and instances where I'm like, oh, therapy brain, boom, and just kind of kick in to solve problems, be present in the moment, which is something that I struggled with. And he goes, so all that would do then, whatever your cards tell you, is just give you more information and knowledge to go through life.
Sure. Yeah. And just to consider, it's just information to consider and think about and ponder. And maybe it is, like you said, maybe it'll help you just like a therapy session or a therapist's giving you this information throughout the course of your, sessions.
Is that something that you have, like readings and stuff like that? Is that something that you have been doing for a while, or is that something that's new to you even?
Well, much like yourself, my first reading was with Candice. I never had my cards read before. She did one before that, which was really, really amazing. I mean, it was really a great experience. And it was very informative and it was sort of enlightening. And so it was like, and that was, I think, what was that, a year ago? It was during the pandemic. Actually, maybe 2020 at this point, mid 2020. Yeah, in the summertime, I think. So pretty much 2 years ago was the first time I ever had my cards read. So yeah, it's a new experience for me, but I think it's just something that like everyone should consider. Why not? I mean, just why not experience it? It's really interesting. It's kind of I don't know, the process is the art is the cards, the deck itself. It's always like it's a beautiful sort of thing to experience.
Well, I think something that was interesting about it to me was, I didn't understand. I mean, just like, you have no frame of reference for it, but when the first set of cards were drawn, it was like two of mine were upside down, were reversed. And I was like, immediately it was kind of funny. I was like, oh, that's bad. And she was like, no, no, no. Like it actually, like I look at it like this, like it's almost like you have the tools or the perspective or whatever it is that the cards are revealing, but you don't got it all in place yet.
Right.
Like you're almost there. You're under the path. And I was like, oh, I kind of like that. And then another thing that I thought was interesting, but almost similarly to therapy, was, she used another set, and I didn't know there was multiple sets of different things, and they kind of tell you different stuff. And so it was funny. She drew other cards, and it was interesting how they aligned with the ones that she had drawn before from the other deck. And I was like, oh, what was the point of that? She goes, well, like a soup, you don't just use 3 ingredients. Like, yes, that would be good, but if you want to elevate it and take it to the next level and all that, like, wouldn't you want to know more? Don't you want to see what else? And I was like, that's an interesting way of kind of thinking about it. And then therapy brain kind of kicked in, and I was like, all right, like, what does this mean? Or how am I taking in this information, and how does it apply to my life and stuff like that? It's been very interesting. And I find I've talked about it with a few people, and they're so inquisitive, but I almost feel like it feels sort of like, I would say for me, the first thing that felt like this was music. Like certain music was taboo, couldn't listen to it because either the lyrical concepts or the imagery or whatever. But more recently in my adult life, it was going to dispensaries and feeling like you're doing something wrong just by even entertaining the idea of doing it. And then when you start doing it, you're like, what was the big fuss about this? This is actually like not for weed. Like, yes, it is cool, but it's one of those where you're like, there's nothing wrong about this. This shit's in cookie jars. Like, come on.
Yeah.
So, I kind of wanted to talk sort of something I find interesting, because for those I'm sure that know the band, know you, like you had another solo project, and I'm still sure you probably will still continue to do that. But I like the idea, and the thought I just kept thinking of as I was listening to this record was, what goes into a name? Because when you already have something established,
right,
deciding to personify your music with your name, it's almost a bit of a rebrand, and it's something that I've done 2 times now, kind of either rebranding an image, and then before having my name tied to the show, but then I had a co-host, and then I was like, I feel disingenuous having my name tied to something where it's a group or a collective. So then Brutally Speaking was born. But I don't think people understand kind of the almost an identity crisis or whatever. I don't necessarily know the words I'm looking for, but it is kind of an interesting thing to go through to land on a name and to use your name. I feel like, I don't want to say it's vanity. I almost feel like it's kind of an absence of, because when you use your name, like it truly represents you.
Right.
So I don't know if there was a lot involved in changing the name or deciding to call this after yourself or not.
Well, I find it interesting. I want to point something out. Okay, your name's John. My name's John. You had your cards read recently. Me too, not so long ago. And now we kind of have the same experience with dealing with the idea of that sort of like ownership of like having a project that is really something like it's really mine. I'm kind of leading the charge, but at the same time, there are other people involved. So you kind of feel like, well, can I really call it my own thing? So I find that interesting, just, just as an aside. But other than that, my experience was pretty simple. I mean, this was going to be another Spylocopa record. It's just been the name that I've been using for many, many years. And I have built a following with it. I have sort of created this sort of like identity that like people know, oh, that's John's thing, But what happened was my manager, Chris Enriquez, shout out to Chris, he's great. He started managing me. And before we even, I think right around the time when Aqualam came along, it was like the same thing. The label came along and so did he. Chris was excited. He was really excited about the prospect of managing me. It was a new thing for him. He just started managing within the last year and a half or so. So he was talking about it a lot with people, and that's the way he is. He's like a networker. So it's a great thing that he's doing for himself. So he had a conversation with this guy named Rob Gross, and Rob is in the music industry as well. He's also very familiar with Candiria. He's a big supporter, and he's also very familiar with the Spila project that I've had for many, many years. But when Chris mentioned that I was going to be putting out another record and I was going to be using the Spila moniker, Rob mentioned, and I have to credit him. He was like, "Look, I honestly think it's time for that dude to start thinking about rebranding and presenting himself in a new way, because it's like it's hard enough to cut through the noise, these days, as with all the people have so much. There are so many people creating things and presenting things to the world now than there ever have been. It's like, how do you cut through that?" And he's like, he goes, his history with it is great, but if this is really something that's coming straight through him, and he really should consider using his own name. And at first I was really kind of like, whoa, that's what the fuck? I was like kind of a little like agitated by it. But the more and more I thought about it, I was like, you know what? This guy is 100% right. It's definitely time for me to sort of like use my own name, use my own identity, because my name, in some circles does carry a little bit of weight. Like people do know my history with Candiria. They do trust that the history that not to whatever. They know who I am. They know what I've done, and if they like that in the past, they'll hopefully come and check out what I'm doing now. So I think that it can be a strategic thing. Other than that, I think what goes into a name is sort of I don't know. I think the name that you choose has to consist constantly. I'm making up words here. I think it has to continue to inspire you in some way. I think you always have to look at it and say, yes, this works. This still works. This moniker or this badge basically still is a great way to represent what we or I do. So I hope that answered your question.
It does. It does also make me wonder with it sounds so weird to say it like this, but I think you'll understand where I'm coming from. But I think this record feels kind of vulnerable in a way that I don't think anything that you've done feels very personal and vulnerable.
Yeah.
I feel like to call it anything other than yourself feels almost disingenuous to the music that you created, personally.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It is very personal. I mean, if I was ever going to get personal at any time in my life, it was absolutely at this point, with the whole world in our minds. And I'm sure we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know where this was going. Isolation will really make you start thinking about things, heavy things. And then, your world gets very small and the people around you become really that much more important. And then, when things start to shift and change, things can become really intense. And, these are intense experiences that I went through and compacted by what the hell was happening in the world, So, yeah, it's a good point you raise.
Well, I mean, even looking at just the song titles, like when I got the link to the record, sometimes I like to just look at titles and kind of think, like even just kind of looking them in the track listing, it's like, what is maybe the narrative that you can get just from that? Mm. And I mean, you kind of look through it and it's like Bled Out, Put You Down. And as you were saying, kind of like a seismic shift, you got Ghost on a Tectonic Plate,
right.
Disconnect and stuff like that. It's like this, I kind of knew going into it, looking at some of these, that I was like, it almost feels like this is going to be a heavy, weighty record. Sure. Yeah. And that's why, like I said, I kind of wanted to take it in different moods, like where it's like when I got high and listened to it, it feels very connected all together. It feels like it just flows, and it's not necessarily, I would say, songs. It felt like movements, kind of, to use like classical music terminology. Mm-hmm. When I listened to it with kind of this, like with sun and the windows down and driving, it took on a kind of more happier vibe. Like I picked up on more of those notes and stuff like
Gotcha.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting how multifaceted this can be based on, I guess, where you're kind of coming into the entry point of where you're coming into the music from. And I don't know if enough people have kind of lived with it long enough in the short time that we've all had it to kind of go through it in that different way. But I know something I focus on and have found very interesting in recent times is talking to the guests on the show and kind of this perception of you as an artist. It's so weird because potentially you've had these songs for a year or two and you've already lived them as much as you can.
Sure.
But now you're having to go backwards and kind of live where you were. So we're catching up to you're in our present, but we're in your past, and somewhere is right in the middle of where everything is. And it's a very weird space to kind of think of people having to exist, never in one moment.
That's really interesting that you say that. I did think a lot about that actually, because, once, this was a very cathartic record. Obviously it's very like you said, it's very deep, it's very heavy hearted. And I've always written music like that. I always have. I've always been moved by music that was more sort of like heart wrenching than anything else. Even though I played in Candiria for however many years, still my heart and my soul is really like this sort of heartache, sad song type of guy. That's always been the way I am. But I did think about the fact that, okay, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to process these. This is how I process life. You know what I mean? I write songs. This is what I do. My mom passed away. I wrote like 3-4 songs. It became sort of like a therapy for me. This is years ago. But this is just how I process things. And it's like for me, I'm so grateful I have it. I mean, I couldn't imagine someone who struggles with either temporary mental disorders like depression from the loss of a loved one, or some kind of traumatic thing that they're dealing with, some kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome, but not having a way to sort of express that or get that out or turn that into like a piece of art or write it down in an artistic way. I think it's such a great tool when you think about it therapeutically. So I did think about the idea of like, okay, well, I'm going to make this record and I'm going to make the art for it. I'm going to do all these things and I'm going to perform these songs, and it's going to be my way of processing this. And then I'll be done. You're never done really, but you know what I mean? I'll get to a point where I'm like, okay, now I can work on something else. But I'm hoping that these songs and this journey musically, and lyrically and thematically, help someone else, So I'm glad that first of all, I want to thank you for checking out the album in many different ways. It's almost like you've kind of like, I don't know. It's really interesting that you kind of did that and kind of like, oh, I'm going to listen to it this way and then this way, even if you didn't do it intentionally, it just worked out that way. I appreciate it.
Well, I think that's the thing for me sometimes. Like I have had this struggle recently where a lot of times I don't really listen to the music that I get given because I don't want this to be, all right, so tell me about this song, tell me about this track, tell me about these things. I had almost about a year ago, I think at this point, like after I had first gone to therapy, I had Lee from Born of Osiris on. They're kind of a progressive metal band. And he had put out a solo record that's very proggy and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't I listened to it, but like I didn't want to talk about the record necessarily. I wanted to talk to him. And we talked about, going to therapy. We talked about drug use and stuff like that, psychedelics and some of this stuff. And then he talked about his addiction to, I think it was Oxycontins or something to that effect. And then through us kind of giving and taking and revealing ourselves to each other, I ended up finding, like, he was like, so I made a comment. I was like, oh, I noticed like watches on the album cover and you have a lot of clock ticking and, the clocks or the noise could be a bomb, could be, all these things, these metaphors. And then he was like, I've never actually told anyone what the actual symbolism and all the influence on the record actually came from, but we've already been talking about it. So I'll tell you like how the record came to be. But I stopped doing that because sometimes listening to music almost becomes work, where I have to like, okay, find something objectively in here that I find interesting, a lyric, a melody, whatever, and then I have to hopefully find a different perspective on it than the hundreds of other people you'll talk to over the course of your press junket.
Right.
And that got to the point where, almost like when I used to book shows, I can't go to shows anymore without thinking numbers and guarantees and all this kind of stuff. So it's ruined it. So I've almost kind of, by doing this and doing the normal press junkets, kind of ruined listening to music for myself. So this is actually one of the first things in a while where I kind of listened to the record. I actually kind of, like you said, subconsciously, I think took it in a few different ways. But oddly, I feel like this fit in right with where I've been, because I've been kind of giving up control of my music. Like, a thing I've been enjoying doing, at least with Apple, is I'll think of a song, boom, hey Apple, play this one song,
right,
and then it starts playing stuff that is similar in nature, whether it's of the era of the same genre, whatever. And so oddly, I've been on an interesting like 90s kick.
Sure.
But like 90s, so like anything from like Tonic to Dave Matthews Band to hip hop and female artists and stuff like that.
Right.
And oddly, this kind of fit right in there. Because the 90s were an interesting time frame where it's like our pop music was so diverse.
Yes, it was. You're right.
And
yeah, you're right.
This
man.
feels like it fit right into that. So I was kind of like, and again, kind of even going back to part of my reading, something my friend's wife had kind of said. She was like, it seems like you're kind of tapped into this. And I'm going to tell you something that someone had told me, like, you don't need this necessarily. Like, you kind of already possess a lot of these things. So why do you feel like you need to do this? Like, you already have those abilities and these things in you. Just do it. Just tap into it.
Right.
And it's been funny in the last week. I've kind of feel like I've been tapping more into some of those things to where I'm like, these aren't coincidences. I feel like these are odd signs that just keep coming and you have to be present and aware of them. And so even with this record, I was like, this feels like I was supposed to have listened to this now. And there's things in it that feel and resonate with me. And so with it, I just feel like it was really serendipitous timing to be like, all right, I'm going to listen to this record. And I even looked at your album cover, and it struck me so interestingly because I don't know if anyone has said this, but there seems to be a sense of almost melancholy, sadness, a hint of a little bit of optimism in just your body language, your posture. But I think the optimism comes through in the color, the magenta cloud, almost like, because it goes from like the pop of color on you and then kind of disappears. And I'm kind of like, as I look at that, I feel like it's something like a breath almost, where it's like, and it's expelled. So you've had that moment of grief of whatever, of, a restarting point.
Sure.
But it's so interesting how even your album cover seemingly ties into, in a visual sense, the visuals that the music emotes.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. It's interesting. There's so many things I want to say. I would like to say first, right off the bat, were the 90s was the 90s the last great decade? Maybe. I mean, I don't know.
I think the 80s are pretty solid too, as I go back and remember a lot of that. Because again, popular music was so diverse.
But after the 90s, I mean, it's so I don't know, what's the word? Everything just seems like, I don't know, everything just blends a little too much. The 90s were very specific, and it was a great time for creativity, MTV, music, like the way music was presented. But that was one thought that came to mind. I want to also point out that, the magenta on the cover was a point of contention for me. Like, I really wasn't certain. I thought to myself, man, I'm really making a statement here with this sort of pink cloud. But I think the interesting thing was I came up with this idea. Like, I never heard the term Thunderheads before. And I was on the road with a dear friend of mine, Andrea Horn, who actually sings backups on that song Pagliacci Kid. She's also in the live band as well. We were driving home from upstate New York. We were on Route 17, and we were driving to this mountain range. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. But we came around this turn, and we see this beautiful mountain range, and I'm like, and I look up, and I go, oh my God, look at those clouds. And she goes, Thunderheads. And I was like, really? I go, is that what they're called? And she's like, yeah, you never heard that term before? And I never have. And it was really like something that just resonated with me, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I was like, maybe this is the album title. And I mentioned it to the label, and they loved it. And I started just living with it. And I started thinking about it in terms of like, I looked up what it meant, like why they're called that. And, you know, they're called that because they build up this, you know, amount of moisture, and they become very dramatic, and they, you know, explode upward. And then, you know, finally they're basically at a breaking point. So I thought to myself, what a great sort of analogy or a great metaphor for the album, and for like the state of mind that I was at, and the state of mind that Candice was at, my, you know, this person that I was worked with a lot on the record, and also became very, very close with during that time period, you know. So it was to me, it was like, like once again, using that word serendipitous, it was perfect. But then along came the idea of like, okay, what's the album cover going to be? So I was like, I just see like clouds, like these dramatic clouds being I was like, this is so easy. Clouds are beautiful. Let's just find little clouds. And so I started doing that. And then I started layering them over different images. And I came upon that one cloud that actually had this sort of tone to it, this color to it. And no matter what I tried to do, I couldn't get it to look right unless it was really like that intense pink magenta color. It didn't look right. I mean, we try to use it in other ways, like the Bled Out single, there's another variation of it. It's like blue. And that's the best. That's the only other way it sort of looks right. We really struggled with getting the artwork to look a certain way, and it was only, like I said, it only works really, really well when it's that color. So to me, it's like another thing where it's like, okay, this is kind of meant to be, and don't fight it, don't be afraid of it, just go with it. So I'm glad that it has this it kind of gives off this sort of vibe to you, to someone who listened to the record and sort of looked at the artwork and kind of got that from it, because it can mean, obviously I want it to mean whatever, you know, whatever listener sort of sees or gets from it, that's great. But for me, it really does. It's that duality of like this intense experience. It's really heavy hearted, but at the same time, there is also this sort of, I guess idea of perseverance or recovery, you know, so that breath, you know?
You know, it's interesting. You know, I was talking earlier about how I had my cards read, and then there was a secondary set of cards that were used. So as my friend was explaining that she, like I said, uses multiple decks, the second set she used were called oracle cards, and they're more colors and words. So I wonder, just, you know, because seemingly kind of trying to tap into things and thinking about things more as you're in the moment, I wonder if those two colors, if you were to go through and find out what those two colors actually represent in that, on that set of cards, I wonder if it would be in line with what thematically, you know, everything is kind of tied in, even in that capacity.
Oh, interesting. I wonder myself.
I will probably do a little digging when we're done and kind of find that out, because it's sometimes like there's things like that where you're like, well, these are the only two things that work. And why fight it if like that's just how it is? Why fight it?
Yeah. And it's funny because, you know, like I was really hesitant. I even thought that like there was a part of me that thought, man, are people going to even buy this record? It's like pink and blue, and like the vinyl now is pink, and, you know, and apparently people are like really responding to it. And I'm happy about that. They like really love it. Like they commented like specifically, wow, the album art is beautiful. I really love it. So I'm like really glad that worked out. So yeah, man, sorry to cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, I think sometimes, like, I have found there to be things like that too, where it's like even with the artwork, like as you kind of see it now, you know, when I had Porter from Atreyu as a graphic designer, and I had him kind of do it because I wanted someone who kind of knew me and knew and had been on the show to kind of help me bring out what, you know, the next iteration of the show in visual form. And, you know, he was like, well, what do you think? And I was like, I just want it to be clean. Like, you know, my other logo was so busy, like it's super colorful, because I just kept thinking you need something even in a little thumbnail, like on a phone or whatever, that's going to pop, that if you see it when you're scrolling through, like you're going to, wait, what's that? Because it doesn't have the headphones. It doesn't have all the cliche things that podcast graphics have.
Right.
And I said, that was great for a time being, but I want something that's a little more subdued. I want something that's more, you know, just clean and simple. And I was like, I find as I get older, that's kind of what I want. I mean, in light of the background of my office, but it's like, even in doing stuff like that, it's like, I would like the wall that's next to me used to just be a hodgepodge of shit. And it's like, now I'm like, okay, like these skateboards, put them in a color pattern. Right. I have a DMX poster next to my Aaliyah skateboards, put the red and black ones next to the red and black DMX poster. Like there's kind of things that you just start doing where you're like, I want things to kind of be clean and simple and just have their place. And I feel like even in some of these things, like, just, the universe will kind of just tell you how things should be. Like, you'll just kind of see it and be like, oh yeah, that's obvious. Yeah. And I think even in your album artwork thing, it seems like throughout the whole process of this record, the thing that I keep hearing you say is, it just happened. It just kind of, I stopped fighting. And I feel like when you do things like that, I feel like it just reveals and just works itself out. And it's such a metaphor for everything. Like, I should just stop fighting things and just see what happens.
Right. Yeah. That's also, I think a lot of people might have experienced that through the pandemic. At this point in my life as a musician, I've been making music for, I started, I don't even want to say it, but I've been doing this a long, long time. And I got to a point where I was like, you know what, this is it, man. Like, I want to do what I want to do. I want to do it my way. I want to be confident in my own voice. I want to be confident in my music. And I just want to do what kind of comes through me naturally. And there's no reason to not do that anymore, because what do I have to lose, really? At this point of the game. And I'll be honest, I think so far, the journey has been really, really rewarding in the sense that the amount of support I've been getting from my friends, even my family, my bandmates, the label, my manager, the people that have seen me perform, my peers, it's just, I'm glad it's happening now, because I feel like, everything in its right place, everything happens when it's supposed to happen. But I don't know, like a part of me wishes I would have did this a long time ago. But whatever, man, it doesn't matter. Everything happens for a reason when it happens. And I'm just glad that it's happening.
I think that has been something I have learned with this podcast for, the 5 years, a little over 5 years we've been doing, or I've been doing it, is it's interesting. I used to like stress out about like 30, 40 emails in trying to get someone, and then it falls through for whatever reason, or, literally sitting here waiting, to talk to someone. Like I had Jonathan Davis, was going to talk to him 2 minutes before he was supposed to come on. Management calls me and they're like, hey man, it's not going to happen. And I'm like, all right, like we'll reschedule, like when works. And they're like, no, it's not going to happen. And I'm like, fuck.
Wow.
All right. Like whatever, not a big deal. Like you just kind of take the L and move on. But like, this oddly has taught me so much that I've been able to put into my own life. Like you said, things are going to happen when they're supposed to. Like there's been people where I've tried so hard to get them, and then it's like when I stopped caring, when I'm like, it's whatever, it's fine. Someone else will come along and I'll have a great conversation with that person, and whatever. And then said person maybe hits you back up and they're like, hey man, like I got some time. You're like, awesome, yeah, let's do it. And I tend to find that when those people kind of come back, the conversation is infinitely better than it would have been if I would have done it when I would have done it, because I would have been, like you're saying, almost musically, not forcing it, but it's like, I don't think I had the capacity to have what the conversation should have been. Like this conversation, if you and I would have had it a few years ago when you were on Warped Tour and I was trying to like get something going, I don't think we would have had this conversation at all.
Wow. Wait, so you tried to get a thing going with Candiria during Warped Tour?
A couple times, actually.
Really?
So I tried doing something on Warped. We went to... my wife and I had always talked about going somewhere other than Detroit, because Detroit's hot as shit and there's just no reprieve from the heat.
Right.
So we ended up going to see a friend's band play their last show, and they're from Rhode Island. And then I was talking to the singer. I'm like, hey, are you going, like, you guys partying afterward or whatever? And he goes, the guys are, I'm not, I'm going to the Connecticut, or he goes, I'm going to Warped tomorrow. And I go, Warped Tour's in Rhode Island? And he goes, no, it's in Connecticut. And then I looked it up and it was like an hour away. So I was talking to my wife, I was like, want to go to Warped Tour? Like I had a friend on the tour, and then she was like, yeah, let's go. So we bought tickets, went down, and it was the one in Connecticut, and I think New Haven, I think is where it was.
Okay.
Super gorgeous day. It was like the best Warped Tour experience anyone could ever ask for, like a nice spring day, with lots of trees and all that kind of shit. And I had tried to, because I think I had my gear with me, and I was like, on the tour, I would reach out and try to do something, but I guess I wasn't on the level to have Warped Tour, because I think Warped Tour is the one who handles the press things, not the band stuff.
Yeah.
So I know. So it just is what it was.
Right.
I think I was going to try to do
for that, man. We were doing tons of press. I mean, every single day we did so much press. It was weird, man. Warped Tour was the type of thing that like I never had any interest in Warped Tour. It's not really my thing, like the style, if you want to call it like Warped Tour music or whatever, which is, really, kind of a lame thing for me to say because but I'll get to the good part. I had no interest in Warped Tour, never wanted to go. I didn't look at it as like my thing. But then when we got it and like there were people that were like insistent that we do it because, they were like, you don't turn down the Warped Tour, you just do it. And I was like, all right, I guess we're going to do this thing. And then we started doing it and it was really hard at first. We went through 3 tour buses in the first week. We almost went home. We almost quit. But once again, there were people, and I have to credit AJ Channer from Fire from the Gods and my singer Carly for just really being adamant about we're not giving up and we're going to stick it out and we're going to figure this shit out. And we did. And we wound up on an amazing tour bus and we wound up doing the tour. And I will say it wound up being one of the greatest experiences of my life. And it wound up being a great learning experience. And I have a profound respect for anyone that is involved with like any type of summer tour or any type of traveling tour. It's a thing to sort of be in awe of, like the crews and the people that do the catering, the people that build the stages, the people that are managing these stages. I mean, their day is like, they're doing 15-hour days every single day. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And then the bands and the musicians, what they go through, it's such an intense experience. But point being, like, we woke up in the morning, you had to find the grounds. You were parked however far away. Then you had to go find a toilet if you needed it, and just take a moment. And then like you got your schedule and you found out where you were going to go do press and what you were going to do, what time breakfast was. It was a really, really rigid, intense experience. And you were busy until that show ended. And then when the show ended, you got to go and hang out and have a drink and party. And then the crew continued working and it was just nuts. And yeah, man. But my apologies that it didn't work out simply because, we didn't know who we were getting interviewed by ever. It was kind of a wild thing.
Well, I think, and it's funny, you have echoed the same sentiment I've made several times on this show, because that was, like I said, I had a friend that was on the tour. Ooh. And once because I was trying to surprise him and not tell him I was there. I was just going to have him show up, but he had a clothing company that he also had a booth for while he was TMing for CKY. Okay. And so I hit him up and I was like, hey, a friend's there. Like, they want to meet you or whatever. Where are you at? And he was like, didn't answer my text. And then finally I was like, hey, asshole, I'm fucking here. Where are you? Yeah, and then he's like, you're here? He goes, and then when we met him, it was funny. He goes, well, you're like Midwest. Like, I always know, like, when I'm in the Midwest, I might see you in Chicago here, whatever. Right. You're not East Coast people. And I go, which is funny because I'm from the East Coast. So like the fact that you don't associate me with as an East Coast person is funny to me. But it was interesting going to that because I have said, getting that all access pass to just see the work, like going on to those like main stages that are cut in half, like to see a band, like as soon as, hey, we're done, we're so-and-so, come to our merch, so-and-so's up next, whatever. Right. To then literally see crew tear that down real fast. And then the other band's crew set up, strike the stage, sound check while the other band's playing. Yep. So as soon as they're done, boom, now the next one goes, load up the truck, like just to see all that. And then even when we went to catering, just like walking through and seeing like, oh, here's a dude like giving haircuts to people, like just in the middle, and people are, the barber shop kind of vibe, like of people just waiting around, joking, catering too. You see like bands that probably you wouldn't assume the people would go together, but like they're hanging out and stuff like that. And it was so interesting to see a tour like that from that perspective. And it's like, I know I talk so much about it, but it is one of those things to me. It's like, you just don't understand how crazy it is to see it firsthand and just see like, these are like the pro of the pro world of touring. And like you said, it's essentially setting up a small city day in and day out for 30, 40 days in a row, probably traveling across the country. And even I think you have 1 or 2 Canada dates too initially, but it's just, it's fucking incredible. And it makes you then, when you go see other shows that are like stationary touring things, and you're like, why are you running 40 minutes behind?
Exactly. Also shout out to all the concert goers, the people that come out to these shows, because I will say, man, the heat can be brutal in the middle of summer. And, it's like people at the end of the day are like running for cover. Like they're in the shade. They're any little tiny shade. They're standing there because the sun beats down on you, and it just can really take a lot out of you. We've seen a lot of people dehydrated, a lot of people being taken out on stretchers, and day to day, like I think the Las Vegas date, I think it was like a record high of like 120 degrees. We literally saw a melted garbage can. I'm not even joking. You could have fried an egg on the hood of a fucking car. Easily, it would have been like done in a second, but which is kind of gross in a way. But I don't know why I think of these things. The people that come and come out to these things, and they're like diehards. They go every year. I mean, it's like it wouldn't exist without them. So it's kind of like you got to tip your hat to those folks too.
I was always jealous. I don't think the last couple Warped Tours that my wife and I had talked about going to when it was still going existed in this, wherever it was in Vegas, because I think you guys were over, because they have like a legit like venue outside now where they did like Lost Rages and stuff like that. Really great area too. Having gone, and like the Vegas nights are great for outdoor stuff like that. But they used to have it, I think, at like the Hard Rock or something, and they would have stages next to pool, like on pools basically.
Oh yeah, that's totally.
And I was like, that looked like it would be such a blast, because it's like, it's hot as shit, but you know what? I'm gonna hang out in the pool and watch whatever band's here. Like that would be so much fun. Yeah.
Oddly, the heat was so bad that we originally had a merch guy come out on the road with us. This guy named Pat. And this guy was a veteran, man. He had done merch for, you name the band. He was out on the road with them. But I think the third day into doing merch for us, he had a heat stroke. And he came back to the bus, and he couldn't bring his body temperature down. And he was literally, he was dry heaving and doing this whole thing where he was like just puking up nothing, a clear sign that someone is actually in trouble and having a heat stroke. But he insisted on continuing on and working, and we were like, "Yo, man, we don't know, man. This is a little crazy." He's like, "No, I'm fine." And Vegas was the one that got him. And by the end of that day, he was the color of a lobster. A, B, he was completely sick. His body was like, I mean, it retapped. He went to the hospital, and his body took 2 entire bags of IV fluid. Like, wow. Boom, like that. And then the doctor was like, listen, if you continue this tour, you may just get worse and worse and more sick and more sick. And he goes, this is literally like a life-threatening thing that you should consider going home. And he came back to us as like, guys, I'm sorry, I have to go home. And it was like, we were like, this is fucking nuts. How does this happen? And so we had to do the merch ourselves, but it actually turned out to be a good thing, because I think having band members working the merch, it just enabled us to connect more with people and do more photo stuff, and do the things that the new fans and the young people that never been to a concert before, because you're so fortunate to be in a situation like that where like, wow, this is this kid's first concert, and there's something that they'll never forget it. They will never forget that. And you have a fan for life, basically. As long as you perform well and you're not an idiot, you have a fan for life, because they're loving it. They're just fucking loving it. And it's great to meet those young people.
There's 2 things to that. You're talking about the Warped Tour experience for you. 2 things that I feel like I just kind of thought of. First of all, your bus issues, the story you just told of Pat. Like, I feel like if there's anything that a band can be thrown, it has happened to you guys. And as you were telling the story of like, we went through like 3 buses, and AJ and Carly were like, let's ride it out. I feel like that just, going back to mantras, I feel like that's just your fucking mantra for Candiria. We're just going to ride it out.
It's true, man. That's the story. I'm riding this wave, baby.
And secondly, and I guess I mean, I see it with some of the shows I go to. Like, I was talking to my wife the other day, and I don't fucking remember I wish I could remember what song it was, but I was like, how is this song 25? Oh, Spice Girls. Like I was saying, like randomly some stuff comes on. One of my favorite Spice Girls songs ever, and I don't give a fuck. When Two Become One or Two Become One, like the vocal melodies on that were all the like because the it sounds terrible to say it like this because I forget her name. The black singer.
Cinnamon.
She's not. Huh?
Is that? No, I'm thinking of another.
Scary. I think it's Scary Spice.
Scary
I think it was
Spice?
first.
Okay.
I think, which is also problematic too. Now I think about it. But it was one of those where she wasn't kind of the main vocalist like she was on a lot of other tracks. It's kind of the 3 or 4 that aren't. And when you kind of get to hear everyone's, because it's a real slow kind of ballady thing, and I was just like, God, this vocally, the song is just so great from a production standpoint. Like it just sounds so good. And I like happened to like look down, and it was like whatever Spice Girl self-titled record 25th anniversary. It's like, how the fuck is this record 25 years old?
Crazy.
And then my wife just goes, yeah, we're old. So it's one of those like, you know, thinking about as you're talking about the Warped Tour thing, you know, thinking about how you guys now have become a multi-generational band. Like, I'm sure you see that.
Sure, yeah. It's amazing, man. And we're very like, we don't quite understand it sometimes. We're like, okay, how is this like, you know, this crazy music that is just like so complex and aggressive. Somehow, you know, I look at Spotify numbers, not that it really matters much, but it is kind of telling. I think we have more monthly listeners now than we did even when we were actively touring and like for Warped Tour and doing those dates. More and more people are becoming fans now, and it's kind of amazing and a beautiful thing because, we were just young artists trying to do our thing, what we thought was an interesting and fun way to write music, and we're glad that. We still get excited young fans and people interested in interviewing the band and talking to me and talking to other guys and wondering about what we were trying to do and all that stuff. So I am very happy to be part of that experience.
It's definitely something that, like I said, when I saw this, because I was actually thinking, I have so many weird ties to the band. Like when you guys played Lansing, a friend of mine had booked the show. And I think that was another time I had tried to get someone for the podcast. And then I think you guys showed up late, like with van issues and some other stuff. And it was just like, eh. And I was like, I'm just going to go and enjoy the show. Like if it was meant to be, it was meant to be. Right. But it was one of those, like having seen the band kind of in different iterations. And even like a friend of mine, when he and I haven't seen each other in a little bit. And he was like, again, life kind of mirroring each other. Like I just bought this house with my wife, and then he just bought a house with his fiance. Right. And so we were kind of texting the other day, and he was like, "Who do you got coming up on the podcast?" And I was like, "Oh, interestingly enough, I have John." And he goes, "Oh, do you want me to like help you like come up with questions?" I was like, "No, I don't really do that anymore. It's just a conversation." But I go, it's funny. Like we haven't talked in a little while. Listening to this record, kind of thinking about the times I've seen you in recent years and stuff like that. And he was like, yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about, because he had tried out for Carly's band, and kind of almost same thing with Pat in a different time frame and timeline. Hafer, my friend, had tried out for Carly's band. They really liked him. They wanted him to be a part of it. And Carly was like, "Look, dude, like you live in Michigan. You need to move here. You're also diabetic. Like, and we ain't gonna make the kind of money you need to like sustain as a being,
right?
Like if you want it, it's yours. But like I can't in good faith kind of have you knowing that like I'm kind of ruining your life."
Yeah, sure.
And so it was just kind of funny just to kind of, again, like life kind of bringing all these memories and these things together at one point where you're just like, I haven't thought about it in a while, or I haven't seen this person, or I haven't, whatever. And it was just kind of like one of those, I was like, man, sometimes life will remind you of just how connected we all are, even if we've never met.
Sure. No, 100%, man. Yeah, Carly, man. I mean, he is that guy. He's so great. He was the one who called me whenever it came time to join Candiria. And although I think his attitude and maybe his style, he was a much younger guy at that time, might have been a little bit a less I wouldn't say warm, because he was always a warm and charismatic.
Let's say less abrasive.
Abrasive. Like when he called me to join the band, he's like, yo. He's like, "You want to join my band?" And that was it. And I was like, okay. Now he's a little bit more, he's older, he's wiser, he's definitely, I think that the thing that I love about Carly is he is not afraid to shift gears throughout his life if need be. He's kind of like a true blue type of person. Like he's always going to wear his heart on his sleeve. And I'll never forget him saying like about Candiria and specifically in our musical journey. He was very persistent in the idea of like, I want to start bringing more light into the world. There's too much darkness and I don't want to add to it anymore. And it was something that really stayed with me. I was like, wow, what a kind of intense thing to kind of decide and then just say, because you're definitely stepping out of your comfort zone. And now you're going to do this thing where it's like, instead of harping on this negativity, not that Candiria only harped on negativity, but we did really, I guess we did. Let's just say we harped on negative aspects in the world and how to sort of combat that. But instead of it, I guess it's really just a perspective thing, or like there's more than one way to say something. Like, you know what I mean? Like you can give someone a boost of confidence, but you can do it either one of two ways. You can do it with this selfless sort of like encouraging sort of way of saying it, or you can say it in a way that is what's that word? Can't think of it. Damn it. Sort of like I don't know. Oh, damn it. What's that fucking word? I use it a million times, but I can't think of it. Anyway, there's more than one way of saying something, and you could say it with like a negative connotation, or you can say it with like encouragement and support. You know what I mean? So I think that's kind of where he was going with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny. Like I feel like, and I know I got to wrap up with you because you got someone right after me, but in a couple minutes. But
sure.
It's funny you say that because I talk about pivoting all the time. If you're hitting something and you're just not finding the success, stop for a second. Again, take the breath, pivot, and then try to find success. And I see so many people in the music industry in different facets that I like. My friend I was talking about that was on the tour managing. He was in a band. He was from Long Island. Band got signed to Josta's label and just couldn't kind of get over that hump of kind of taking the band to the next level to be sustainable. And they called it a day. And he was, he has said on the podcast, he was like, I played my last show. I took an opportunity to tour manage Bam Margera's tour, and I made more money doing that than I ever did playing in my band. And now it's taken him to where he's gone all over the world. He's, had a successful career TMing and doing lights and all this other stuff for a lot of artists. And it's one of those where it's like, you could have just kept beating your head against the wall and being one of those people who's like, man, if, and I hear these stories on, not on my show, but on other podcasts, where you'll hear kind of the jaded musicians like, if that one record wouldn't have been fucked over on getting released, or this one manager didn't fuck us, or this one tour would have come through. And it's always like, and I hear that and I go, the signs were there, man. Like you could have done different things.
Sure.
And even still, all these years later, all I hear you say is it's someone else's fault, and you don't look inward, and you didn't pivot. And to me, I hear so many of those that it's like when I hear the stories, and I think it's because you have shed an ego, you look inward, and you're able to go, something's not working. What can I do to change it? And be kind of manifest your own destiny there. And to me, kind of full circle moment, I feel like that's something that you have constantly done as an artist and as a band, is taking things into your own and kind of pivoting where others maybe would be like, well, this is successful, I'm just going to keep doing that. And it's like, but it may not be successful to me. It may not fulfill me. So I don't want to keep doing that either. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. And just to comment on what you were just saying, that like learning that sort of that attitude about like, oh, it's this person's fault, this happened, this is why. It's like you have to be careful to not allow something to sort of become like your identity. Like for many years, and I have a problem talking about the accident at all, but for many years, it's hard for when something that intense and traumatic happens to you, for you not to think about like this way that like, oh, that's my story. It's part of your story.
Doesn't define you.
It doesn't define you. And I think that is something that it took me a very long time to learn that. And to also learn that like, okay, you're a musician. It doesn't mean you have to be broke. doesn't mean you don't have to work. And it took me quite a long time to finally be like, okay, I don't want to be broke anymore. I want to have fucking money. I want to be comfortable. So I need to like pivot. I need to like, music is here, money's here. Like, let's kind of do this, or this, and that's really what it came down to. And I'll be honest with you, since I made those moves and became more active in like making sure that I'm working all the time or doing something productive that actually enables me to easily pay my bills or I have security. Now that that's in place, I can put in the right amount of time to focus on music, and I'm actually way happier, and I'm kind of actually doing better now than I ever was. I did want to go back and say that the word I was looking for was patronizing.
Okay.
So, I think, anyway, that's all.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up because I feel like I could talk to you for a long time.
Yeah,
so anytime you're doing a project or if you're ever around in the area, I would love to have you back on and just shoot the shit and catch up because this was a lot of fun for me. I don't know. Hopefully the rest of your press junket is equally as fun as maybe this was, hopefully, for you.
Yeah, no, this was great, John. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. I love talking to you, so let's definitely do it again.
Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your day. And where can people find you or whatever you want to plug online?
LaMacchia music, basically, one word. That's pretty much all over any social that I'm on. Facebook, Instagram is the main thing. I'm comfortable with that platform more than anything. But I'm on TikTok, man. I'm trying.
I tried that the other day or a couple weeks ago, and I was like, I don't get this. I'm done.
It takes a moment. What are you going to do? This is, we're doing podcasts. We didn't do them 20 years ago.
I know.
So it is what it is. But thank you once again. I really appreciate it. And I'll definitely be sharing and letting everybody know this is a great podcast. So thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. You too.
So that was my conversation with John. Once again, want to thank him for his time. It is one of those sometimes when you kind of get on a roll with somebody and you have to be very aware of the time and you're like, okay, I have to cut it off at this point because there's someone else coming right behind him to talk to. And it's such a bummer to like know that you have to like refrain from continuing a conversation that you're thoroughly enjoying, especially when topics kind of get brought up and you're like, we could circle back to that. We could circle back to that. And do all those kind of things and just keep this conversation going longer. It is one of those where I think there's still plenty of meat left on the bone from a conversational standpoint between John and I, and he is welcome to come back on any point whenever he would like to and just continue on the conversation, just to catch up even. I did really find it interesting, as I was talking in the intro and as you heard in the conversation, I was a little bit hesitant to bring up the fact that I'd had my cards read recently. But it was funny that, in talking about, the last song on the EP, it became this connecting point between the two of us where it was like, that's actually my first time as well of my cards being read and you're literally getting to hear it. And so a lot of the connections and a lot of the things that you're feeling are accurate, because they are these things. They are something that you obviously have gone through and it's kind of a similar experience that we shared, except for I put mine on record and you didn't. It's been very rewarding to kind of open up a little bit more about things that I'm going through. I think I've made mention of it before, but sometimes, it's a little bit scary to open up about your life and about your things you're going through personally. And, and I know I have done that more frequently as of late, even more so than I have in the last year. And to have some people reach out and just kind of be like, it's actually really refreshing to hear someone say these things. It's very positive reinforcement to kind of seek enlightenment and to kind of just find your way through life and not be afraid to do it. It's just it's one of those interesting experiences as you get older. You just kind of want to learn more about yourself and kind of, I guess, the universe and the world we live in. So, I guess potentially, if that's something that you're into as well, you heard two people who had their first experiences with it and, had a good experience with it. All of that said, speaking of kind of new experiences, I've got a whole bunch of new beers recently, and I'm cracking into the Under the Pear Tree from Martin House Brewing. I haven't had it yet. Pear is one of those that I feel like it's either really good or it's too much. There's not much middle ground, so I'm interested to see how this goes. Actually, the sweetness of the pear complements the the kind of sweetness of the sour, or the sourness of the sour. Kind of a redundant statement, but it actually works really well. It's a very good balancing point. It almost tastes kind of like a juice more than a beer. Super drinkable. Martin House, again, knocks this one out of the park. I kind of want to give something away. Speaking of beer, I kind of want to give something away, but I'm going to wait until I'm a little bit further along in the process of to announce what I am kind of working on behind the scenes. But just know there is something on the horizon where I will tap a little bit more into the beer craft world, craft beer, craft cocktail space that we don't really necessarily showcase on this. Also, speaking of showcasing, I would love to give a quick little shout out to all the sites that actually ran my videos from me going to the Lamb of God, I was going to say Anthrax, Lamb of God, Megadeth, Trivium and Flame show this past week. It's crazy. When I filmed the first couple of songs or whatever of Korn set from Upheaval last year, I think tentatively it's tapped out at like about 60,000 views collectively between the two videos. Right now, I think I'm on pace to have almost 60,000 views and a couple hundred comments and about 100 subscribers in a matter of one day, a little over one day as I'm recording this. So potentially, if you are listening to this podcast, because I do see that some of you are going back and listening to episodes, which is awesome and greatly appreciated, and why I put the podcast over on YouTube as well. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who's new. Thank you to everyone who shared the videos, who's commented, all those things is greatly appreciated, especially as a DIY podcast that, you know, that kind of reach and stuff like that doesn't just happen unless you dump shitloads of money into it. So thanks to everyone for the share and all that kind of stuff. We got some great episodes coming up. But to wrap up this episode with John, if you would like to keep up with him, you can find him at LaMacchia Music on Instagram and Twitter. He does have a Facebook. I don't know if he's adding personal friends. I don't see a like page on there personally. So I guess proceed with caution on that one, if you will. And if you would like to keep up with the podcast, it's simple enough. You can find us at Brew Speak Pod on all of your various social networks. Follow us, you know, wherever you listen to this podcast, rate, review, subscribe, whatever it is that you can do. If you would like to support the podcast monetarily, you can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/brewspeakpod. We have access to episodes earlier than you will get them on the normal feed. There's extra content of an extra podcast called What I Learned from a Podcast. I usually do behind the scenes videos of making weekly playlists, which I've been slacking on a little bit. But having just bought a house and having a million projects that I've been doing, that makes my time go somewhere else. So forgive that, but there has been a new playlist video that just got updated about a week ago. And there's tons of great stuff over there. Always open to connecting with everyone and just growing this thing into its own little community, which is a very interesting segue into next week's episode with Sergio from Quicksand. Ex-Deftones. I'm sure at this point you have heard all about all of those things. This is a really great conversation. I can't wait for you guys to hear it. But in the meantime, you'll have to wait a week. So till next week, I am John, and I will see you all then. Have a great weekend.